Hello everyone, Bashrob here, and in this video I'm gonna go over all the feats, including all the new ones, and explain how each of them works and give my opinion on whether they're worth picking. Feat number 1, Book Smarts. Book Smarts gives you 10% more skill points when you finish reading a skill book. This is one of the least useful feats in the game, as you only gain the benefit until you read all the books or max out your skill levels, so it only really helps early game. And that wouldn't necessarily be a big deal if the bonus was actually significant. But you only gain one extra skill point for each book you finish, which is an extremely minor benefit. Instead of spending a feat slot on this, just shoot that one more wolf or cook that one more tea to get that one extra skill point. Number 2, Expert Trapper. This one is quite fast to unlock if you use rabbit traps at least occasionally. Too bad it's also nearly useless. The description of the feat says snaring is 100% more effective, but this is misleading. To understand why this feat is bad, you need to understand some basics about rabbit snaring. A snare will roll a chance to catch a rabbit 12 hours after it's placed. The real issue is that there's a hard limit on the number of rabbits you can catch each time, based on the size of the grove. So Expert Trapper won't really help you catch more rabbits, nor catch them faster. It will just be a bit more efficient when you use a small amount of snares, but the easiest solution is to just place down more snares and pick a different feat instead. Number 3, Cold Fusion. While the first two feats were probably the least useful ones, Cold Fusion is arguably the best feat in the game. The feat description says you get a 2 degrees Celsius bonus to air temperature. And the wording here is very important, as the bonus to air temperature is not the same thing as wearing clothing that gives you 2 degrees of extra warmth. Wind chill penalty is calculated off air temperature as well. This means Cold Fusion actually warms you up by more than 2 degrees, as it lowers the wind chill temp as well. Cold Fusion would be amazing even without this, but the fact that it helps with wind chill makes it stand out even more. This feat is slightly less useful on lower difficulties late in the game, as you can find very warm clothing and the temperature doesn't drop as low as it does on Interloper, but it remains very useful even on Pilgrim and a must pick on Interloper. Firemaster is a feat which people probably disagree on the most, as it can range from nearly useless to extremely useful. It's the only feat that doesn't give you any kind of a special bonus, and instead just starts you at a level 3 fire starting. This means you will never have to use Tinder to start fires, and your fire starting chance is much higher from day 1. For these reasons, Firemaster is one of the most useful feats very early on, but its usefulness gradually drops the longer you play, as eventually you would reach maximum fire starting regardless of whether you pick this feat or not. Personally, I prefer picking this feat on most of my shorter runs or on challenge runs, but avoid it on long survival runs, where I prefer choosing feats that will benefit me the whole game. Feat number 5 is Blizzard Walker, which reduces the speed penalty for walking into the wind by 25%. This is one of the better feats, as the headwind speed penalty is quite significant, and the reduction will be helpful your whole run, both early and late game. Though the reduction is not as significant as it might seem when you understand how speed penalty from headwind works. I talk about this in more depth in my video about movement, but in short, the penalty is the highest when walking against medium strength wind, and there's no penalty at all during blizzards, which makes the name of this feat rather ironic, as it doesn't actually do anything at all during blizzards. Another quite useful feat is Snowwalker. This makes your stamina recharge 20% faster, allowing you to sprint more often. Now, if you played a long run before, you are likely aware that sprinting everywhere is not really viable, as it drains your fatigue way too fast. Sprinting is typically used in shorter dashes, to run away from danger or to cross thin ice, so this feat will not help you all that often. But it's still nice to get your stamina back faster in case you need it again. There's one more feat that affects your sprinting, and that's Free Runner. This is one of the easiest feats to unlock, but also a lot less useful than Snowwalker, as it doesn't affect your stamina or fatigue, it just makes you less hungry when sprinting. That's a very minor benefit, however I don't think it's completely useless, and this feat is still at least a bit less bad than a few others. This bonus has one niche use. It makes sprinting more calorie efficient than walking per distance traveled, so if you're almost starving, about to lose well fat and don't have food on you, sprinting to your base with this feat is what could potentially save you from losing well fat. Efficient Machine also lowers your calorie burn rate by 10% and is honestly one of my favorite feats. The 10% reduction might not seem that large, but what I like about this feat is that it's always active. Running, walking, standing still, sleeping, hugging bears, it doesn't matter, you always consume fewer calories. And while food is typically not an issue in most runs, especially late game, it's not as much about saving food as it is about saving time spent preparing the food. 10% fewer calories consumed means 10% less time spent cooking to not starve to death, and that time saved really adds up. Straight to the Heart is okay, but not amazing. It increases the buff duration of coffee, acorn coffee, energy drinks, and stims by 25%. That's pretty decent. The main problem is that all of them are not renewable. So while this feat can give you more out of all these items, eventually you run out and the feat will not have any use on that run. Now that on lower difficulties, you can rarely find stims while beachcombing, but the benefit is still quite minor. One nice use of this feat though is that it lets you climb 2 ropes instead of 1 in a few key locations, such as the summit in Timberwolf Mountain or the gold mine area in Ash Canyon. The last of the old feats is the Darkwalker feat. This is the only feat you cannot unlock just playing survival mode. Instead, you need to complete the Darkwalker challenge. This makes it the fastest feat to unlock. Darkwalker feat doubles your fatigue drain during the day and halves it at night. While the bonus is quite interesting, the penalty of losing energy twice as much during the day, the time when you're the least likely to sleep, is just too much of a disadvantage to make this worthwhile. It gets even worse when you realize the day portion lasts from sunrise to several hours past sunset, when it finally gets dark enough for auroras to be active. So you actually get the bonus for only up to 9.5 hours and the penalty for 14.5 hours. That said, there's one clear use for this otherwise horrible feat, and that's custom games with endless night enabled. When it's midnight forever, you never get a penalty and always get a bonus, and the bonus is pretty damn good. Now onto the new feats. The first one is Celestial Navigator, which you unlock for completing the third tail. This one increases your movement speed by 10%, but only when certain conditions are met. It only works at night and follows similar rules as the Darkwalker feat, which means you can only get the bonus for up to 9.5 hours between 8:30 p.m. and 6 a.m. But even at night, it only works during clear nights when there are no clouds at all, so only during clear weather or auroras. Partly cloudy weather does not work, despite being clear enough for mag lenses to work. There must be no clouds at all. Also, it only works when walking or crouching. Sprinting is not affected at all. The bonus stacks with terrain, slope, or wind bonuses and penalties as expected. I covered those in more depth in my movement speed video. Overall, this might seem like a very small bonus that you rarely get, but it's not that uncommon to stay out until midnight, so I think this feat is still pretty damn good, but the fact that it only works during clear weather or auroras makes you not benefit from it that often. For that reason, I'd say it's roughly on par with Darkwalker, useful but not overpowered. The second feat you unlock by completing the last tale is Settled Mind, which makes you completely immune to cabin fever and lets you research books 20% faster, which typically means you get to read the skill book in 4 hours instead of 5, though some books take longer to read and you save even more time. The research speed bonus is quite minor and comparable to book smarts in usefulness. The cabin fever immunity is the main appeal, and while a skilled player can deal with cabin fever quite easily even without a badge, with the addition of the cougar, cabin fever becomes quite a bit harder to manage in case you decide to face the cougar. Failing to kill it and getting the new major lacerations affliction can get you locked inside a building in a fragile state for days, and not having to deal with cabin fever in such situation could be the difference between survival and death. Also note that as of the release of the video, the research speed portion of the badge is bugged. On release, the bonus didn't really do anything, and after a patch it now gives you a skill point each time you pass through a loading screen after reading a skill book for that skill. This glitch allows you to max out all skills very early on. And the final new feat is the Big Cat Killer. This one isn't a reward for the tail, instead you have to kill 3 cougars to unlock it. Cougars have been removed from the game shortly after their release, so that Hinterland can improve them a bit, so this feat is unobtainable as of the release of this video, but should become obtainable once the cougar is added back. And if you are fast enough to kill 3 cougars in the 4 days it existed in the game, you get to keep this feat despite the cougar being removed. This feat makes all wildlife less aware of your presence, and the wildlife will be significantly less aware in all ways. Sight, smell, and sound detection range are all halved. This bonus stacks with crouching and tap crouching as well, which allows you to get much closer to all wildlife. It's particularly noticeable with deer and timber wolves. Even aurora timber wolves, which usually spot you from very far away, now don't see you until roughly the regular timber wolf range. So when it comes to picking feats for your run, I'd follow this strategy. If you're playing Endless Night, pick Darkwalker, otherwise never pick it. If you're doing a short run or a challenge, pick Farmaster, otherwise don't pick it. If you still have free slots, pick Cold Fusion, as it's a tier above everything else and just too useful. It's less useful on lower difficulties, but you also get more feat slots, so there shouldn't be a reason to not pick this. If you still have free feat slots, pick almost everything else. You could argue some of these are better than others, but it really comes down to preference and playstyle to objectively split them into more tiers. Straight to the Heart and Free Runner are not as good as the other ones, but not useless. If you like the niche purpose they provide, or don't have the other feats unlocked, you can consider picking them. Book Smarts and Expert Trapper are simply never worth it, unless you have nothing else unlocked. I'd definitely pick Farmaster over these even on long runs. but they are probably still better than Darkwalker on a non-endless night run, as they don't mess up your fatigue during the day. And that's everything for now. Thank you for watching.